My name is Serge Kahili King, and I'm going to do a little bit more of a blessing, and then we'll have a more informal greeting. Amaku aloha mahalo, e hoku mai kai, ike ahale, ame ike a po'i manu, mama. Blessings to this place that we're gathered in, and to all these people who are here. So, now we have an informal greeting. You all probably know it, so I'll just say it and you just repeat it. Actually, I'm going to say a little bit of a longer greeting, and you don't, it's proper for you not to pay attention to that. And all you have to do, I'm going to teach you a little bit of Hawaiian. All you have to do is, in return, is say, aloha no. So I'm going to say, aloha something, something, something. And all you have to say is aloha no, which aloha means love. So these are greetings of love. And what you're saying in return is love indeed. And I'll be saying what today is translated as let there be love between all of us this noontime. So, aloha wakea kākou. Good. That means good.
And Serge is talking about the Maile sisters from Hawaii. And we used to live on Kauai, so we're very familiar with this place, and we're familiar with the mountains and the Maile that grows there. And we know a chant, but we haven't done this together in a very long time. So I brought the words even for me, not just for Lois. And we do it call and response. And it's about those 5 sisters and their differences, but they're each very powerful in their own ways. So this celebrates the goddess within each of those sisters. And Serge will tell you more about them in his song. But this is just a chant to get you in the mood for your own inner powers and to celebrate the differences that we all have in our uniqueness. Okay. Ho paliuli ke alaka maile, ke alaka maile, ke alao heno, pili kapoli, ke alao heno, pili kapoli, ke ha'i moe ipo ka maile.
Aloha, e ku
All right. Now, we're going to be telling a story of the Maile sisters, plus one, and related to our topic. It's important to understand, to begin with, in Hawaiian literature, which is not really literature, but it's an oral tradition of stories and legends, there's lots of different versions told by different storytellers at different times to emphasize different aspects of the culture and different things that they want to tell stories about. So this is one version of a story about the Maile sisters and another very sacred person. And if you go looking for these stories, which I recommend, don't be surprised if you find lots of different versions, lots of different ways that people tell the stories and what they tell the stories about. Okay? So, to begin. Ikawakahiko, Mamualoa o Kapena. Once upon a time, long before Captain Cook, there were 5 Kupua sisters. Kupua is like a person with magical powers, sometimes translated as a shaman too. These were the daughters of a high chief who lived on the island of Kauai. Now, 4 of the sisters were named after 4 varieties of a plant, a vine called Maile. It's a very sweet-smelling vine that grows in the high forests, some of it here on Big Island, but also on Kauai. But Kauai is most famous for it. Now, these 4 sisters were Maile Laulii, and in this story, she was the eldest. It means small-leafed Maile. I'll tell you a little bit more about the plant in a moment. Maile Ha'iwale, which means little Maile. Maile Kaluhea, which is fragrant Maile. And Maile Lamui, which is big leaf Maile. Now, if you're in Hawaii for long enough, at some point you will probably see a lei made out of Maile. And what it is, it's all leaves. And usually they're kind of oval and pointed, but there are different varieties. And they're kind of a bright green. And they usually have a very wonderful fragrance. And on Kauai style, they're worn around the neck with loose, open ends. But sometimes on the other islands, like this one, they're kind of tied in a loose knot. You'll find them used a lot for weddings and for very special occasions or to honor special people. And so that's a very common way of using Maile. The 5th sister, her name was Kapuahala. Now, Kapuahala means the blossom, and it's implied the fragrant blossom, okay? The fragrant blossom of the hala tree. Now, you've undoubtedly seen hala trees, but just in case you didn't know what they were, in the old days, the tour guides used to tell the visitors that when they looked up in the tree and they saw a particular kind of fruit, they would tell them that was pineapple, because it does resemble the pineapple. But pineapples don't grow in trees. It's got these big leaves that almost look like an agave, if you know what that is, or is a yucca plant in a way. And the big leaves come up and they reach a certain point and they get too heavy for themselves and they bend over. And then they end up at a point and they usually have thorny edges to those leaves. It's also sometimes called a pandanus tree and sometimes the walking tree, because as the thing grows, it puts out these shoots that go into the ground and form a base that allows the plant to move, to grow further and further and further and further over. Okay? So it's sometimes called that. Leaves were mainly used for mats, for hats, and it makes a very fine weave when you prepare them properly. So that's the kind of thing we're talking about. Now, these 5 sisters, all of them had the power to emit the fragrances of the plant that they represented. And I'll tell you right now, in some stories, the 5 sisters were the plants, with the power to take human form. But in this story, they're going to stay human the whole time. Okay. All right. So, one day, a storyteller visited the island of Kauai. He went to the court of the high chief, and he told this story of a very, very beautiful, very sacred woman. She had such a high rank in the aristocracy of the time that she was hidden away because she was so sacred. Her name was La'i'i, and usually the full name is La'i'i Kauai. And also you'll hear some people, now some people will say why, and some people will say why. I do it in different ways sometimes, but usually I do it the way my family did it, and so I use why. So La'i'i Kauai. I did it. I couldn't help myself. The ie, La'i'i, is another word for ie, which is a type of vine that grows in the forest about 1,000 to 2,000 feet up. That would be 300 to 600 meters. And it grows very abundant in those forests at those levels. And it was very tough vine. If you look at Hawaiian, see Hawaiian, a little bit of Hawaiian culture, you know how they had capes, and they had helmets, feathered capes and feathered helmets. Well, the ie vine made the base that the feathers were tied to, okay, for the helmets and for the capes. Okay, so it's very strong vine. But that's what this woman's name was, La'i'i. And she's very famous for her beauty, and also for the fact that she lived in a sacred place. You may remember hearing it in the chant, a place called Paliuli. Now, Paliuli is one of those strange mystical places that we find around the world. There's one very famous one in the Far East called Shambhala. And in the oldest tradition, Shambhala is supposed to be invisible above the Gobi Desert. Well, Paliuli is supposed to be an invisible sacred place up in the highlands of Huna, on the slopes of Kilauea Mountain. But just because it's given a physical location, that doesn't mean that everybody can just go there. It's a magical place. Did anybody ever see the movie Brigadoon? Yeah, right, if we can remember that. That kind of a place. Okay? So, these sisters heard the story of La'i'i, and they got so excited. They wanted to see this beautiful woman. They got, of course, especially excited because no one was supposed to be able to see her. But they said, we're the daughters of a chief. We can do anything. So they went down. They didn't have to ask permission from anybody. They went down and they got the canoe ready. And they took off from Naualili Harbor on Kauai. And they sailed all the way past Oahu, past Molokai, past Lanai, Kahopolave, Maui, over the northern end of Big Island, if you can look at it. They came up like this, over this very dangerous, the Alenui Channel, and over down the east coast of Big Island, down to Puna. And there they landed on the shores of Kapoho, which used to have a beach. Okay, now it's all rough lava, but it used to have a beach there. So they landed there, and then they asked the local people, how do we get to Paliuli? Well, everybody laughed. Nobody gets to Paliuli. And they said, well, we're daughters of a chief, and we can get there if we want to. But there was nobody who could help them, and nobody could guide them, so remember now, they had plant powers. So they talked to the plants, and they used their knowledge of the forest, and they made their way up into the hills and up the slope of the mountain, and the hills were much thicker, the forests rather, were much thicker than they are today. But they finally made their way up. They lived on berries and roots, and they made shelters out of tree ferns and ohia trees. And days and days they were searching. And, they almost got tired of saying, we're the daughters of the chief, we can do this. Because nothing was happening and they couldn't find it. And then one morning, bright and clear, sun shining, which happens sometimes on this side of the island. And the eldest, Maile Laoli'i, climbed up on this little hill and looked down, and she looked down into this valley. And there was such a sense of peace in that valley, and right in the center of this little valley, there was a hut that shined bright in the sunshine because it was all thatched with very yellow flowers, almost golden in their color. And she knew that had to be it. That had to be Paliuli. So she ran back, told her sisters. They all got excited. They took some time out. They washed in a stream. They had brought their, good clothing with them because, in those days, all the clothing was made of bark. And although it could be made to be very soft, it was also quite fragile. So it didn't last too long. But they had wrapped in tea leaves to keep them dry. They had wrapped a lot better clothing. So they got dressed in their good clothing, and each one of them helped the other fix her hair. So down they go, down the hill, sit in front of the hut. And there, right in front of the hut, they sit together and do a chant. And the chant was something like this. O beauty of Paliuli, we've come from Kauai. We are 5 sisters, also daughters of a chief. Come to your golden feathered house. O beauty of Paliuli, let us in that we may look upon your loveliness. And they chanted beautifully. They were masters of that. And of course they expected La'ie to come out and invite them in, but nobody came out. And they waited and they waited and they waited and they waited. Nothing. So when it got dark, they trudged back up the hill, and they had already made a camp there, so they were talking, and one of the sisters said, maybe we ought to go home. And Maile said, no, we are daughters of a chief. Okay? We cannot turn back. And she said, tomorrow we'll try something else. So the next morning early, Maile went down, and she sat outside the hut, and she produced this fantastic perfume because she knew it would go through the breeze and go into the hut. And she was right. It was inside the hut, La'ie, who was being guarded by her grandmother, she said, grandmother, what's that wonderful smell? And the grandmother said, well, that's from one of the 5 sisters who want to see you. And La'ie said, well, it is a very nice smell, but I don't want to see them. So, nothing happened. Maile went back up. She's the one who said, maybe we ought to go home. But when the other sisters, no, we'll try again. And every day for the next 4 days, each one of the sisters went down, sat there, emitted their fragrance, and they did this one by one so all the fragrances wouldn't get mixed up. They would emit their fragrance, and nothing happened. So then they finally decided, okay, this is time to give up. He's not going to come out. But that night, the last night, Kapuahala had a dream. And she had a dream of her Aumakua. Now, Aumakua has a number of meanings in Hawaiian, and one of them is a kind of like a guardian spirit. And her guardian spirit was a giant hala tree. And when she saw the tree in the dream, it had tea leaves growing at the base. Y'all familiar? Not the tea you drink. You're familiar with tea leaves, I hope. Okay. So it had a lot of tea leaves growing at the base. And the tree said to her, it spoke to her and said, you are the daughters of a chief. You do not give up. All right, so when Kapua Hala woke up in the morning, she suddenly knew exactly what to do. And she told her sisters to wait and give her one more chance. So she reached into her little packet of belongings and pulled out a tea leaf trumpet. Now, a tea leaf is a long, slender, very green leaf. It has a lot of uses. Today we see it used in leis a lot, but in former times it was mostly used to cover things or to make packages of things. But there was also a way to make it into a trumpet. And this is what she did, because she played it very well, and she would play it on the way during the journey to amuse herself and amuse her sisters. But the dream had told her what to do, so she took the tea leaf trumpet and she went down, sat outside the hut, and just played and played and played. She was so good, she could play a lot of different songs. She played love songs, and she played happy songs, and she played sweet songs, and she played, all the different songs of birds and everything she could think of. When she finally ran out of songs, she was just about to give up. And right at that moment, the door opened. Out comes La'iye, covered with a rainbow over her head. And birds so thick around her that they lifted her up so her feet wouldn't touch the ground. Now I have to tell you two things. Rainbow was always a symbol of the highest royalty, of the highest chief. And on the very, very highest type of chief, they were always carried wherever they went, because they were considered so sacred that if their feet touched the ground, that would make that ground so sacred no one else could ever walk there. Okay? So that's why La'iye had all these birds who carried her wherever she had to go. So they carried her outside the hut, and she said to Kapuahala, where does that wonderful music come from? How are you doing that? And Kapuahala said, well, it comes from my tea leaf trumpet. And she showed La'iye how to do it. But La'iye tried, and she couldn't make a sound out of it. It's not an easy thing. And so she said, look, this music is so wonderful, and I love it so much. She said, would you stay and play for me and be my companion? And Kapuahala said, yes, but only if my sisters can be here too. And then La'iye smiled, because she did love their fragrances, just not enough to come out of the house. And she says, of course. So all the sisters came down, they came and lived with La'iye, and that's how they became both companions and guardians of the most sacred woman in all of Hawaiian story. Okay? Pipiho kika'au, and so runs the tale. Now, how does this all relate to what our topic is? Well, the topic is the healing power of affirmations. The first thing, of course, kind of self-evident, but in the story, now when we say healing power, when we're talking from a kind of shamanic point of view. When we say healing, we mean healing of body, mind, and circumstance, not just body. And so in this story, what they were doing all the time, from the moment they began their journey, the sisters were affirming they had the power to do whatever they wanted, because they were sisters of the chief. I mean, the sisters, daughters. They were daughters of the chief. Now, I'll explain the kind of affirmation that they were doing, but they were affirming all the way in two different forms, and I'll explain that. And that's what enabled them to get through and to continue and go through all the trial and trouble and even danger, and finally accomplish what they wanted. And there were times when they, were ready to give up, and then that affirmation would come back and it would keep them on the path that they had chosen. So affirmations are statements that sound like facts. Or they can be statements that sound like beliefs that a person has or that they want to have. So that's usually what an affirmation is. When they're used in the right way, they can be a powerful tool for doing and being and having what you want. And I'm going to try and explain some of the ways of using them that will be most effective for you. You can affirm anything you want. You can make a statement about anything. You can declare that anything is true. Of course you can. But the most powerful affirmations, the ones that have the greatest effect, are the ones that are affirming something that already exists. So the primary affirmation that the sisters made was, we are the daughters of a chief. Now, that was true. There wasn't any doubt about that. That was a fact of their existence. It also served them to remind them both of the powers and privileges and responsibilities that they had as daughters of a chief. So that is an affirmation that is very powerful because it pulls up and brings into conscious awareness something that you know is true. You just need reminding of that a lot sometimes when you get scattered and discouraged. So that's the most powerful kind of affirmation, to affirm something that's already true. Now, you can affirm other things, but I'll tell you about those kinds of things and how to make them work. The other kind of affirmation is one that helps to establish new habits of thinking, feeling, and behavior. Now, that's what the other half of the affirmations that they made, that's what kind they were. Because they would say, we are the daughters of a chief. We can do anything. That was something they wanted to be true. Okay? They really didn't know if they could do anything until you try. But that's the kind of thing where you say something that you want to try and make it true, or make it a habit. When I was in Africa, I was hired to do community development work as an assistant for programs in West Africa, and I was supposed to be an assistant for 2 years. And after 2 years, if my work was good, then I could possibly be promoted to a director of programs with responsibility for all the programs in a particular country. As it turned out, however, the organization I worked for had some personnel problems, and so I was promoted to director in 4 months. So I was given all the responsibility, and I knew how to do the tasks, but I wasn't psychologically ready. Because now suddenly I'm the boss, and I wasn't used to that. So, in fact, 2 months later, they gave me another second country that I had to take care of. So I began affirming, I am the director. And I affirmed that, and this is important. I didn't feel like the director. But if I was going to be the director, I had to feel like the director. So I began affirming, I am the director, I am the director, I am the director. All day long in the back of my mind, from the time I got up until the time I went to sleep. And about 3 weeks later, I stopped doing it. The reason I stopped doing it was because I was the director. It had become so much a part of my thinking and my feeling that the thought of saying it just faded out. Because I had reached that habit of self-identity. So that tells us something about one type, that in order to change a habit, and we'll say a little more about this, you have to repeat it until the habit is established. Okay? So let me go on with that. It's important to understand this. Affirmations are words. Words by themselves don't have any particular power. They're just sounds that we have accepted as meaning something. So as words, there's no power. Now, some of you might be Potter fans, and I'm really sorry to tell you this. There are no magic words that you can say that would automatically make something happen. They just aren't out there. Now, what is the power of an affirmation? The power of an affirmation comes from its ability to focus your intention and keep it focused. That's where the power is coming from. Okay? It also has the power to stimulate associated memories, like calling up skills or knowledge that you have about something. That will help you carry out your intention. And here we get a slight bit of esoteric here. It also helps to attract people and events that will help you achieve what you want. Because when you are making an affirmation, whether it's out loud or silently, there's also a telepathic aspect to that. And you'll find opportunities coming into your life, you'll find people coming into your life that will be related to what you want. Now, the reason you have to repeat an affirmation so much sometimes is because sometimes you have other stuff inside that doesn't believe what you're saying. And the whole point here is some people have trouble with affirmations, as a matter of fact. How can I say that? It's not true. No, the point is to make it true. Okay? That's the whole point. And all you have to do that is begin to believe it. And how do you believe it? By repeating it until some part of you takes that idea as a habit, and then you begin living it. So it's a training tool. Okay? You're not lying, you're training yourself to feel differently, think differently, act differently. Now, an affirmation that reinforces existing knowledge, something like I said before, something that we know is already true, or that stimulates a well-established habit, you only have to say an affirmation like once. Okay? Hey, can anybody here drive a car? I can drive a car. And you get in and drive it. That's that kind of affirmation. You don't have to keep repeating that. All the behavior and everything is right there. Okay. But if you're making an affirmation that says, I can stop smoking, that's going to take a lot of repetition, usually, unless you have a really strong motivation right away. But usually it'll take a lot of repetition plus reinforcement of another kind that I'll talk about in a moment. So that's again that repetition thing. It's why they're repeated. They're repeated not because repetition by itself has any power. It's because you repeat it until saying it and thinking it and doing it becomes a habit. And somebody just wrote to me recently saying, well, you know, I've heard that you're supposed to make a prayer or make an affirmation 3 times, and if it doesn't happen, you give it up. I don't know where they got that idea. There are rituals in which you're supposed to do something 3 times, and the purpose of that is to help reinforce the idea. But somebody added that give it up thing. Okay? Because if you want something to happen, you keep at it until it happens, as long as you want it. Okay? And that's the only purpose of the repetition. If you can make an affirmation, believe it instantly. And when I say believe it instantly, not with your head, you're going to believe it with your body too. And if that happens instantly, you don't have to make it anymore. If 3 times will do it for you, fine. If 685,023 is needed, then you do it that many times. If you really want the effects. But that's where the power comes from. Usually you don't have to do it that long if you add some other stuff. So let's talk about the other stuff. We also talked about affirmations about things in the form of a fact. Affirmations can also be in the form of a command. In this case, what you're affirming is your authority. And the commands you give yourself. We're talking about primarily here. Okay? So something like you can tell your body, heal! And I can remember one time when we were going to have a big social gathering and Gloria got some flu symptoms, and she said to her body, you just stop that! We're going to do this. And the body said, yes, ma'am. Okay. And she was well. Command can make a very good affirmation. So go, 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 or whatever it is you do this, or do it, anything like that. That can be a kind of affirmation, because what you're affirming is authority. You can use them in the form of keywords. This is where you've established a particular word that carries all kinds of associations with it. so that you don't have to make a command or anything. You can say peace. Especially if you have practiced the habit of having all kinds of feelings and memories and imaginings about peace come up that help you become peaceful, then the single word is all you need for that to happen. It can be, heal. You're good at that. It can be any kind of command. Anything like that. Power, energy, all those kinds of things can be used. It can be a short phrase, a short phrase that brings to mind an intention. I have some favorites that I use in the shower. I'm taking the shower in the morning. I just start taking the shower and I'll say to my body, nice thick hair, right? Nice smooth skin, nice strong bones, nice slim body. It's got the others pretty good. The slim body we're still working on. But those become affirmations that focus the intention. So that's serving a purpose in a different way. And then you can get very fancy, so I'll want to share what I call the ultimate affirmation. This is depending on you, it can be a combination of fact and intent. But I like this one because it blends 3 different affirmations into one. So I'll say it this way. Everything is working out perfectly because I am lucky. I always have been lucky. I always will be lucky. And every day in every way, my luck keeps getting better. Now, here's where every time a lucky thing happens, I repeat that affirmation. Every time any part of that happens, I say thank you, or I say, I'll give a compliment, because that reinforces the affirmation. That helps affirmations work better and take hold faster. I remember one time we had a course on Kauai, and one of our students was taking tennis lessons during the course. And, there's spare time, of course. But she was having trouble because the instructor was teaching her in classic instructor style, which was pointing out her mistakes all the time. And this is the class I was teaching was on how to bless and compliment. So one day she said to her, look, stop that. She said, what I want to know is what I'm doing good. So I'm paying for this, and I want you to point out what I'm doing right. I said, all right. And he started doing that, and he was totally amazed at how fast she learned and how good she became in a much shorter period of time than any of his other students. So when you're giving a positive reinforcement to the affirmations that you're saying, or that are being said for you even, that makes them work better, that makes them happen faster. So that's one type. Also, the other type, that I still have to use more, is when you reinforce by positive action. So you can say, I'm losing weight all you want, but if you don't change your eating habits, it's going to be a long, rough haul before anything happens. So anything you can do, both mentally to compliment and praise, or physically to carry out some related action to what you're affirming, that's going to make it take better and faster. And then finally, there's one kind of affirmation, which can be a blessing. You can say this to yourself if you want to, but you can also say it to someone else or have it said to you. And one of the most beautiful, you've probably all heard this before, but one of the most beautiful comes from Ireland. And I just want to share that one with you as a reminder. May the road rise up to meet you. May the wind be always at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face, and rains fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand. So, do we have any questions or comments on the topic?
No, just today realized that to succeed and stop smoking, I gotta tell myself I want to stop.
Exactly. That's right.
That's just I can't.
That's a key affirmation,
I
right?
always does, right?
Right. Yeah. The motivation is the most important thing. That's what keeps you going anyway. Like in the story, the girls really wanted to see that beautiful woman. If we want to stop smoking, if we want to lose weight, if we want to be successful in some way, the reason for it has to be strong enough for us to keep going and do whatever we can to reinforce it. Affirmations are a wonderful tool, but they help us keep the focus more than anything else. And writing them down and putting them on the mirror doesn't work very well. As some of you probably have discovered, that quickly becomes wallpaper. You don't even see it anymore. Now, affirmations to be effective have to be thought clearly or stated so that you can hear them. Because that's the part that gets your focus back. Because the words aren't magic. It's the focus that's magic.
So you meet it halfway.
Hmm?
You meet your thoughts halfway. You focus.
You have to do the focus, and then you have to do things that reinforce the focus.